All right, let me introduce to you Brian Gates, CBCI from Terra Firma, with his presentation, Two Birds, One Tone. Over to you, Brian.
All right, thank you very much, Saul, and welcome everyone online today. So today I'm excited to share with you guys a case study that resulted in a project approach I believe can help your organization bring information security and business continuity together. It's personally an approach I'm quite passionate about. It's an approach that was born leveraging my learnings of agile methodologies, DSDM in particular, and out of desperation about how to get an information security program moving at a large 100-year-old and highly decentralized organization. This particular program had 3 different project management approaches. I'll talk through each one of the approaches and my experiences. The first 2 approaches were internally led teams, and the third, we'd actually brought Terra Firma in to help us think differently about the program. The third approach we called essential services. It's the one that achieved the best outcomes and is the approach I'll build on to include business continuity. I'm sure many of you will be able to relate to the experiences I talked through today. Oh, and a lot of people have also mentioned that I've missed the S in the title. I want to ensure you that no birds were killed in the making of this presentation. The 2 birds are information security and business continuity, and tone, well, we'll get to that a little bit later. So first, a little bit about me. I'm Brian. I have a background in application development, business analysis, project management, and information security. I've more recently been spending my time in Terra Firma's business continuity and resilience team, looking at IT disaster recovery and business continuity. I basically joined Terra Firma's team after seeing the impact they made to the project I'm going to talk about today. The way they're able to be so professional and bring new ways of thinking into the project. So today I'll bring together my experience in project management, business continuity, and information security to show you an alternate way to think about delivering these programs of work. A few logistics. Feel free to ask questions as we go in the chat. I won't personally answer them, but some of my colleagues may. If not, we'll try and address them at the end. Otherwise, we'll include them in the Ask the Expert session at 11:40. I'll have my video off so you can better focus on my monotone voice. So a bit of project context first. It's like all good stories, this one starts with a security incident that really generated the desire of the organization's board to invest more in their information security program. Probably familiar to you listening today. So the organization itself was a 100-year-old organization, operated about 130 services across Australia, had a mix of national and state-based management structures. It had your typical corporate services functions, IT, HR, payroll, legal, that supported the organization as a whole. Interestingly, states could operate the same service, but in very different ways. So they could use different suppliers, different systems, different operating practices, and even within regions within a state, they operated services in a different way. So similar to what Phil touched on earlier this morning, different ways of delivering the same services. There was approximately 2,000 staff and 30,000 volunteers. Our objective was simple: ensure that all sensitive and personal information is secure. So attempt 1 was a state-based approach. We effectively took a project delivery, waterfall project delivery model. We initiated the project with about 40 leaders in the room. The CEO introduced why this was so important. The CIO added their weight to the conversation. I introduced the approach and our priority, really to find and secure all the private and highly sensitive information. We defined what sensitive information was and what personally identifiable information is. We basically adopted the Privacy Act's definition. We determined the analysis approach. We couldn't do all states and territories at once. We only had 5 people. So we chose one and started working with them. That happened to be the Northern Territory, while we were scheduling the other states to begin working with them. In each state, we'd work with their leaders, their immediate teams, to educate them on cybersecurity practices and our company policies. We'd identify where their sensitive and personal information was. That was looking at suppliers, agencies they shared it with, internally managed systems they used, business managed SaaS systems they may have procured, and the devices they were using as well to hold this information. We look at their practices, how they actually shared the information, how they assessed or onboarded suppliers, and how they captured information, and ultimately how they destroyed or archived information. We work across the states relatively quickly and bring our information together to determine how to best secure it across the organization. Potentially changing processes and practices, pushing suppliers to uplift their information security practices, decommissioning systems, and implementing new systems if necessary. In addition, we had a technology streams that was really focused on our own internal IT landscape. It was looking at things like remediating administrative access. It was implementing new projects such as Steam and secure sharing solutions. It was improving our maturity against the ASD Essential 8 as well. Sounds pretty easy, top down, really waterfall type approach. About 3 months later, we noticed we maybe weren't making the progress that we needed to. We had incomplete information. So in the Northern Territory in particular, we worked with their top leaders who pushed us to work with their teams, who then pushed us to also work with their teams, and so on. At one stage, we were working, we were working with services in the middle of the Northern Territory that only had about 5 clients, but they did have sensitive and personal information that they were capturing on those clients. Technically, it could have been a breach. We were also told when we brought together the Northern Territory's information that we'd missed whole areas. Did you talk to Bruce in region X? Well, actually, no, we didn't, because we didn't know Bruce existed. So we'd missed whole regions of information. We also found that sensitive and personal information was actually everywhere. By its very nature of the organization, we were capturing this information in the majority of services. It really wasn't like trying to find a needle in a haystack that we'd thought. It was more like a haystack of needles that could prick you at any time. There was no consistency or an accurate view of the information we were capturing. So everyone we spoke to had a different view of what was captured, where it went, who was responsible for it, why it was captured. They really only knew about their silo of the organization. HR had a different view of the company structure to what was occurring on the ground. There was no accurate picture of what services existed in the state, let alone what information it required. IT had a different view of the devices to what the business was actually using. They'd been down to JB Hi-Fi, purchased their own devices, and were actually storing sensitive information, but through our web browser interfaces. Finance had a view of suppliers that really focused on those that we had to make payments to. Whoever the organization was using SaaS systems with zero cost. So I think Google Docs, Trello boards, signing up to Jira's, they actually had no cost, so they didn't end up in the supplier or procurements view of the world. Information wasn't passed down. So our approach was to follow the communication channels through the executive leadership teams, state leadership teams, and down. We weren't allowed to send emails, for example, across the organization as a whole. But we did notice that the information we're providing to those leaders didn't trickle down. I remember having a conversation with some of our key stakeholders that we'd worked with tightly from previous projects. She wasn't even aware of the program. So we'd spent time with her manager, we'd spent time with her manager's manager. We'd been mentioned in the company-wide CEO newsletters. We'd done videos and advertised through Yammer. We'd followed the corporate comms channels to provide information for leaders to send down. We'd had posts on the intranet's homepage that was visible to everyone on a daily basis. We hadn't sat with her directly, but that was impossible for 2,000 people. On the positive side, our team was having fun. We were learning a lot about the organization, and we were building networks and really adding value to the impression of IT. We're getting out there in the organization and working with people. And it was a good challenge. Our technology stream was also kicking goals. We'd implemented new technology within IT to help us detect and prevent cybersecurity issues. Ultimately, though, our approach was never going to reach our timeframe targets, and after 3 months, we'd really barely scratched the surface. We certainly hadn't made a tangible difference to the information security posture of the organisation. So we had some discussions with the executives, and we came up with attempt 2. Executive-led, we had the top leaders' engagement. Basically, we felt like this wasn't, the organisation previously wasn't playing ball, and we certainly had enough evidence to suggest that. So the leadership team decided it's actually their responsibility. They need to make this happen. They would drive it within their organisation. Our project team would be there to support them. Hallelujah, I hear a bunch of people saying on the call. It's the executives finally taking responsibility for cybersecurity. It's not just an IT thing. The approach would work such that each executive would allocate a change champion, potentially 2, depending on the size and complexity of the business unit. Our project team would define what needs to be done by when it needed to be done. These were items that the business could really drive, but with our support, of course. So education awareness training, adopting secure sharing platforms, completing user access reviews, cleaning devices and changing how they procured their devices to go through IT. Reviewing suppliers, information security practices, obviously with the support of the IT team. There was also nearly Melbourne Cup Day, a national horse race for any international people listening today. So we developed a report where each champion had a horse. The more items they checked off, the closer they got to the finish line and winning our version of the Melbourne Cup. The approach was agreed with the CEO, the CIO, and the executive leadership team. It really had our team as a central source of authority, support, progress reporting, while the executives and change champions would make it happen across the whole country all at once. Sounds good? Yeah, slightly different approach, but it should work. We have the executive engagement. So 3 months pass, and what do we learn? We still had incomplete information. Even those anointed change champions couldn't get through to the information we needed. A good example being the list of services that operated within one state was never agreed, because some regions within the state had their own little operations happening. Recently, I've heard people suggesting there's 400 services across this organisation. Previously, it was touted about 130, depending on what you counted and who counted it. New projects, the latest digital transformation, blockchain project, or agile transformation project came along. The executives started deferring some of our meetings, and change champions became overwhelmed. They often prioritized the ones that their executives were sponsoring. Sometimes there were no champions. So some leaders had not allocated champions after the 3 months. Potentially due to organizational changes, or they were onboarding someone that would then take that role. It became very compliance driven as well. So the champions that helped were great, but their overarching objective was to check those boxes, get to the winning line, and go on to the other projects. It became very compliance driven rather than value driven. Our team morale, so members of our team left, that became not as fun as the previous project. We were out there working with the organisation. We became viewed as the IT security police, which damaged both ours and IT's reputation within the organisation. We were managing rules and exceptions and not really working with the business as we had been before. Culture fit, it's a bit of a problem too. So we're working with a large not-for-profit, very people-focused organisation that supported vulnerable people throughout Australia. The police and compliance approach just really didn't tone in with the organisational culture. On the positive side, a few of the executives were more engaged in the project. A couple of the change champions were absolutely superb and really stepped up to the plate. They became key contributors in the next stage of the project as well. But again, we weren't really delivering enough value quick enough, and worse, we as a team were starting to not enjoy it. but we weren't giving up. So we had to learn how to fly. The first two approaches weren't all bad, and they might even work in your organization. For us, we learned a lot about the organization. We built new relationships. We developed our expertise with the information security and our ability to help weed out the information security noise, of which we found there was lots. We'd become not just the project team, but we'd become the information security team. We really had to draw on what was working and keep trying. So the things that were working that we wanted to leverage, we're working closely with the business teams. We knew we were getting more accurate results quicker by doing that, and we enjoyed it. It created more value for those people we were working with as well. We needed a clearer, more targeted approach. So the greyness of information security across a large organization made it uncertain for the management teams that had to allocate their resources to help us. How long would it take? What would they need to do? We had to get much clearer to allow them to invest in our project. We needed to create a better network for ourselves. So we needed more people that would help us get closer to a version of the risk quicker. And we needed more people to help spread the word throughout the organization. We had to deliver value. So we had to be able to show that we were making a difference and making it more regularly. We weren't bogged down in a constant state of analysis or analysis paralysis, as some people might term it. We needed more allies, so we needed to be able to work better with other programs that were having similar challenges, and we could really work better with them. The usual suspects, or the change champions that were supporting both projects or multiple projects, were really under the pump. So we needed to do something to help them. We needed a more adaptable approach. We needed something that if the organization changed, we were able to adapt quickly with it. At the same time, our team was learning about agile project management and DSTM in particular, and we saw opportunities in that thinking. We all wanted to show we were making a difference for the organization that we loved and using our resources where it mattered most. So we decided to engage Terra Firma to help us think differently about the project and overcome some of the challenges. This attempt 3 we called Essential Services. It was really about prioritizing. So part of the other aspects to it were engaging more meaningfully with the organization, developing time boxes, breaking through some of those organizational silos and dependencies on single change champions, creating a scalable and repeatable model, and really focusing on delivering value incrementally. We still had the same resources as a team, but we had to use our organization more effectively. As a team, we also wanted to make sure we were making an impact for all our hard work. The next slides will talk you through some of the key elements to this approach and how it worked for us. So first, bit of a definition. The Collins Dictionary defines tone as someone's tone is a quality in their voice which shows what they are feeling or thinking. The tone of a speech or piece of writing is its style and the opinions or ideas expressed within it. So for us, that really meant moving away from compliance, trying to find something that toned in with an organization that was highly people-oriented. We had to ensure our delivery had to work with and ideally strengthen the other projects. We wanted to tone in and not stick out. It really meant thinking deeply about what we were trying to achieve. Why was it important for the organization? What would resonate with our organization? What would resonate with our board? And ultimately our external customers and stakeholders. It really had to be about our customers and not about us. It had to be about more than checking boxes, just because some contract we must implement ISO 27001 or 22301 standards. Our program was about information security, but you'll see here how we can tone in business continuity and information security together to bring those programs together under a common purpose. So for this organization, that purpose became trust. The program became known as the Trust Initiative. It was no longer an information security program. It was no longer a business continuity program. It was a program aimed at our customers and ensuring that we're, one, protecting their personal information and the organization's more sensitive information, and that the services they depended on would be available when they needed them. This immediately set the tone for the conversations we had with subject matter experts and their suppliers, conversations with the executive team and the board. It immediately felt different to the project team as well. So it felt more purpose and value driven. When new contractors came on board, they immediately engaged with it rather than opened a standards manual. When we engaged with service managers, we used scenarios that were meaningful to them. So a couple of those examples are, the organisation ran a service that made calls to elderly residents who are often living alone at home. Effectively, we're trying to make sure they're alive on a daily basis and hadn't fallen over in the shower and needed support. What would it mean to our customers if we couldn't make those calls? So the business continuity aspect there, how do we make sure those services are being made available? There's other services that support traffic people. What would it mean if their information was compromised and made publicly available? In both those instances, the worst case is death. So we started to think along these lines for the programs. And as I mentioned, this was an information security program, but if we merged with the business continuity project, we could have brought together business continuity and information security to help our stakeholders reduce the amount of projects they were tending to ensure we're reducing duplication, and we weren't creating more silos of information, i.e. the information security team gathering lists and the business continuity team gathering similar lists. This was really step one, change our tone and engage more meaningfully. Step two became about time boxing. So this slide is an example of what might be done to bring together business continuity and information security. It's not an exact representation of the time box we went through. So the idea of a time box is that we create a repeatable 2 to 6 week plan that's aimed at not at departments, but bringing together groups that made sense to do together, no matter who they reported to. We weren't just working with one change champion, it was a team of people. So a team of people, subject matter experts, suppliers potentially, coming together in a time box. In that dynamic, they can keep each other in line, they can cross-validate during the discussions, they can argue about ownership, prioritization, and workarounds right there and then. Importantly, they can also learn from each other. The difference to the previous approaches, people actually flew across the countries. They literally crossed state borders, pre-COVID days, of course, to come together as teams. So they were crossing those state organizational silos. Previously, we'd even struggled to get one-on-one meetings. Now we're getting people flying across the country. And the time boxes were 2 to 6 weeks, dependent on the size and complexity of the groups we were bringing together. So you can think of the time boxes as like mini projects. The team had a kickoff where the team came together and discussed the approach for the next 2 to 6 weeks, discuss priorities, and every time box had a kickoff. So it wasn't, we did one kickoff at the very start of the project with 40 leaders in the room anymore. It was a kickoff targeted towards those teams that were coming together to achieve the sort of results we wanted in the time box. We'd learn and discover, so we'd educate teams on best practice, company policy. We'd dive deeply into what they did, what systems they used, what suppliers they used, what agreements they had with those suppliers, what types of information they kept, how they used, and how they shared it. We'd create, so the key here is that we're aiming to actually remediate some risks there and then. So we might create a BCP plan. We did user access reviews of high priority systems. We trained people in how to use secure sharing platforms. We created security exception requests, and we created organizational lists of devices and suppliers that were actually from the ground, what was happening within those teams. Now, we didn't do the exercises, but I think this will be a great way to finish off a time box, is exercising a plan. So if you created a BCP, exercise it there and then while you've got the people together for that period. It could even start a time box. So do an exercise initially. How would you respond to a security incident or unavailability of systems? When we closed, we didn't just say goodbye and ran off. We identified items for future analysis and remediation. We created a report to formalize what was discovered, achieved, any risks we had identified. And importantly, what are the next steps for engagement? How are you going to stay in touch and keep the momentum with the people that have taken their time and flew across the country to get to them? So just to note, you don't start a time box day one of a project. It takes time and some pre-planning to get it together. So get your default workbooks, your education material, maybe starting lists of applications and resources, etc. Determine what are the most critical elements that should be addressed within the time box. What's nice to have if you have time. So this could be a Moscow type analysis for those that are aware of that. You need to identify what roles and people need to be engaged throughout the projects, which SMEs, which suppliers we're going to bring together for this period of time. How long should it be? Should it be 2 weeks? Because we can probably nail everything in one discovery workshop. Or we're going to need a few iterations of discovery workshops because it's a bit larger and more complex. And ultimately, what do we aim to deliver at the end? How do we make sure we're reducing those risks? So step 3 was to build an organizational service backlog. Those that know agile will know some of these terms from there. So our backlog was really just a list of prioritized and grouped business services or functions that made sense to do together. Brought together a team of SMEs, your project team experts, and potentially suppliers. So it isn't necessarily an easy task across a large organization. We came up with a model that grouped like services together across state boundaries. We grouped corporate functions together. Finance, HR, legal, let's do them together. And we brought key suppliers in when we needed to. You could also use ISO 22301 or BCI's good practice guide initial concept of a BIA, the initial BIA concept to prioritize by impact. You could group by risk, you could group by amount of revenue. We've worked at organizations where we've worked across the whole organization, with business units that had $6 million in revenue, while at the same time we're working with organizations that, business units that had $600 million in revenue. So we could have just focused on the $600 million stream initially. So it really depends on your organization, but the aim is to try and get your team working where it matters most first. And remember, you don't need the whole view of the organization before you get started. You really just need your first service defined. And then you can get started with that time box while you're figuring out what's the next time box, what's the time box after that. Also, try to set up your teams so they cross organizational silos. You'll get unique perceptions of what's occurring. You'll improve your accuracy. You'll get less gaps in your analysis, and you'll have more fun doing it too. So part of the value of delivering a time box is, time boxing and then developing your backlog is that you can prioritize. So you can prioritize the services you want to focus on first and get to the less important ones later. So for our example, we actually had a priority of our top 4 services that we're going to bring together across state boundaries. We had our defined time boxes. We had our workbooks and materials prepared. We had our flights and accommodation booked. Then bushfires happened. Now, this organization supported people within bushfires to recover from bushfires. So obviously the operational priorities operations took priority. So part of the benefits was that we could just move that backlog around. So instead of working with service A, we moved to service B. We did service A later and rescheduled them. We were still following the same structure. We still had the same people. Yes, we still had to kind of reschedule and get other people engaged, but that wasn't really a problem to the project as a whole. So some of the other benefits of developing your organizational backlog is that your time boxes can occur when the resources are available. You can sequence those with your teams and your business. Ideally, you might do service A first, but bushfire could happen, so you do service B. Depending on your resources, you could also run 2 time boxes concurrently. You can show this to your management team that you can deliver the project earlier if you have more resources. It's very clear in the way you do it. You could also just run it sequentially, depending on your resources. You can have much clearer overall timeframes for your stakeholders, but you can have much clearer timeframes for the individual services that you're trying to get in a room. So if you say 6 weeks, that's how long your time box needs to go for. For us, this resulted in, we're also working with the most important and high priority areas of the organization first. So we weren't working in the middle of Northern Territory with a service that worked with five clients. We were now focusing where it had the most value. And we had visibility as a project, so people knew we were working with the highest priority teams. We ended up kicking off time boxes sequentially, but we found that after some practice, our team could split and we could actually run time boxes sequentially as well. Our backlog of remediation items was growing much quicker than it was before, but this was a good thing. We were learning about the organization, we were finding and remediating risks, or putting them in the backlog for further action. So there's some synergies in this approach in bringing together business continuity and information security. I think there is the obvious one: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. 2 parts information security, 1 part business continuity. So why not, during your education and learning phase, determine not just when you need to get the applications back, but what type of information those applications are holding. Similarly, for your suppliers, when do you need whatever they're supplying back, and what type of information they're holding, particularly for those ICT SaaS suppliers. Incidents and exercising. A simple exercise might be to exercise a cyber incident that results in the unavailability of systems. This actually occurred at the organization we were working at. It was a SaaS supplier, and it had the privacy impacts, so we had to notify commissioners, etc. But we also had a system that was unavailable for 6 weeks. So how would you effectively, if you're exercising a cyber incident that results in the unavailability of systems, how would you effectively communicate with your customers that they may have had information breached, but they may also be unable to access that service? How would you manage an incident? What other teams and plans might you need to work with? So your cyber incident response team, your privacy team, your crisis management team, your business continuity, and your IT disaster recovery teams potentially. How is that all going to come together? Your impact analysis. So look holistically at the impact analysis to determine the impact of not just resources being unavailable, but a privacy breach, similar to what I just mentioned, or integrity compromise. Business continuity often use plan for the worst and hope for the best. Why not use your highest impact as a privacy breach that results in system unavailability? Could that actually be a worst case scenario? End of the day, you'll be managing risk for the organization. Whether you're accepting that you don't have a DR plan for a particular system, or the strategy is to run down to JB Hi-Fi and procure some laptops. Identifying risks that you can't implement a particular security control because of a unique business scenario, or accepting a risk where project X rolls out. Just manage them together, ensure that your remediation items work in both security and business continuity domains. Don't create more silos for your change champions to manage. So in this approach, what happened? It wasn't all perfect, of course, but it was definitely better, and we had some unintended wins too. So engagement, as I mentioned, people actually flew across borders to attend workshops. Previously, we were flying to them or just not getting to them. Organisational learning. So the teams learnt from each other. During those workshops, they decided to drop processes they were doing and adopt the other team's processes. That resulted in reducing risk straight away, so we could decommission systems or SaaS, shadow IT, as Juliet kind of mentioned earlier, systems, reduce the effort required to manage user access. It was adaptable. As I mentioned, a bushfire literally happened and we had to reschedule another time box to occur. Another team came to the party, we worked with them instead. There was limited impact to the overall rollout. Happier. Our team was much happier. We were again working with the business, we were learning, we were building relationships. The business teams were happier. We were there to understand them, to help identify and reduce their risks. We weren't there just to police them or manage towards some timeframe targets. It was resilient. So when champions left or were seconded, we already had other subject matter experts that were in those workshops that we were working with. People had already been engaged in the same sprints. We built networks with people that would not have really been selected as change champions in other approaches, but they consistently gave us insights into what was happening behind the scenes once the sprints had finished as well. When we needed to call on them, we had those relationships. We were able to show evidence of the changes that would justify the investment, and some simple user access reviews, workaround strategies were developed. There was a source of truth, so we were building a source of truth incrementally for the organization. So in summary, engage with a common tone that suits your organization and other programs. Timebox to create a repeatable process and more certainty for your stakeholders. Build a prioritized organizational backlog that allows you to adapt to changes and focus where it matters most. Find synergies to work better with the similar programs. Equals jumped in there. Did you do that, Saul? And aim to deliver value incrementally and lessen the emphasis on knowing everything before you do anything. So Brian, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn or through Terra Firma, and thank you for your time today.
Brian, thank you. That was terrific. It's interesting that you talk about your time box approach, given that we had a question earlier from Pradeep that asked about the world that we live in, rapid agile systems, making a reference to the BIA. I'm not sure if you want to have a quick comment about that, or we can carry that forward to the session later.
Yeah, I think bringing people together, as Juliet hit on as well, but bringing them together in a structured approach, I think really builds purpose and value and builds your networks. So you no longer are reliant on one change champion or one SME within IT, as I can't remember. Someone asked a question about previously as well. But I think that'll probably be a good one for the after expert session too.
Okay, cool. So how are we going for time? I think we're right on time, so that's good. Brian, thanks so much.